One of the more confusing statements for me within the CTMU personally that took me a while to understand was this idea that reality is a language that talks to itself, about itself, for its own purposes. And this can be very confusing because the way that we usually think about language as something that is spoken or written is very different from the way that we usually think about reality, which is immersive and replicable. It's something that can be experienced. Doesn't look like a language to us. But the idea of this section is to define the structure and dynamics of reality in such a way that you can actually think of it as a language which is generating its own representation. So the reason that reality doesn't look like a language is because the display of reality is that which is configured and processed by the language. And so that means we are actually what the language is referring to. So the just like if I say the word mug, that is something within the language. But properly, in a true language, the object mug is also part of it. So that which is referred to and that which is doing the referring, which is the word, are actually self-dual to one another. So in the same way, the universe that we see, the display domain of the created universe, is actually that which is referred to by the self-configuring, self-processing language. We're going to look at this from the lens of mathematical metaphysics. It's like Archbishop of I think it was South Africa, Desmond Tutu said. He said that language is very powerful. Language does not just describe reality. Language creates the reality it describes. So with the CTMU, it's a self-configuring, self-processing language, which means that the universe, the physical universe, is that to which the language refers, and it is not just describing that language, it is creating the reality within the process of description. And so it is ascribing reality to itself linguistically, and that means that it has a way where meaning is considered to be a linguistic function. Reality is giving meaning to itself, it's giving significance, it's giving sign to itself, and that means that reality is signifying something to itself. It's aiding in some sort of deeper understanding, and by creating and configuring itself to form a universe, it is able to actually signify something to itself for its own identity. And that's why we say that the purpose of reality is self-identification. And reality is a telic self-identification operator that attributes existence to itself, meaning that it has the teleology, it has the purpose of its structure and dynamics, basically forming the essential basis of its observation and theorization. So that means that all of its abstract structure, as well as its concrete instantiation, is contained within the self-configuring, self-processing language. So a true TOE, a true theory of everything, must be identical to its universe on the syntactic level, meaning that its structure must somehow ascribe existence to itself as a property of the universe which it is describing, and thus there must be an entirely self-contained explanation for its structure and dynamics. So theories have linguistic structure. Theory is actually short for theoretical language. And reality is self-theorization. And reality is mental, as we know. So it's self-theorizing when it's actually thinking about itself abstractly. Reality's self-theorization is syntactically equivalent to the CTMU, to its own self-modeling universe, which defines its intrinsic medium. So reality takes a model of itself that connects the abstract language to and the intrinsic language through which it exists to its formal universe, and in that self model it then evolves. So there is a processing element which is looking at that self model, and then it says, oh, we actually have to update the universe based on this new information that we have from this language. And the way that the universe communicates that information to itself is through that self-configuring, self-processing language, which takes every single like microscopic objects called syntactic operators. It's actually something which is operating on the global syntax, which means the global grammar of that language is actually being configured and fine-tuned by every single object within reality, which is considered at various strata to be some sort of syntactor or some sort of teller, which is a structurally complex syntactor that can give feedback to the language of reality. So reality's intrinsic medium is linguistic, and that's why the meta language, the meta-linguistic identity of reality, is also called an intrinsic language. It says that the CTMU actually says that M, metaphysics, equals L-int. So metaphysics equals the intrinsic language of reality. So when we're talking about metaphysics, when we're talking about this domain of discourse where we're discussing existence, causation, change, and so forth, all of that has to happen through an intrinsic language to reality that defines and structures it. So obviously there's no language outside of reality that's going to give structure. It has to be an intrinsic language, meaning that reality defines itself as that language through which it exists and evolves. So this means that reality can be described with unlimited precision as a true theory of everything. And this structure, the TOE structure, must apply to every point, part, object, process, relation within reality without fail, making it the synetic and syntactic identity of the reality system. So the structure of language, the structure of the self-configuring, self-processing language has to apply to everything within reality because reality is defined as this intrinsic language. The language is intrinsic to the structure of both reality and theorization. Language is the most general and powerful structure. All theories are languages, and even the theory of languages is itself a language. Language is the most general mathematical structure. You might say, "Oh, well, I wrote a book about mathematics, and that actually proves that my thing is more fundamental." Well, hold up a second. What did you write the book using? Did you write it using just like pure equations without anything written down, no symbols, no numbers, no letters? You wrote your book without any numbers, without those. That's all part of language. And so that means that language subsumes everything else as the most general algebraic structure, because you can use a word to signify any object, process, or relationship within reality. So that makes it more general than any other formal structure. And most other formal structures actually fall within the category of language because reality is itself a language, and cognition is a language, perception is a language, theories are languages, disciplines are languages, books are obviously written using language. If language were not mathematical, precise, and general, then Langen says not only would mathematics and therefore mathematical physics be inadequate to explain reality, but there would be no such thing as mathematics and physics at all. So therefore, reality is properly described as linguistic, but it possesses special properties that are unique to CTMU theorization, namely that of a meta language, which means a higher order or self-referential language that can attribute existence to itself. So reality is a language that talks to itself, about itself, gives itself meaning, gives itself a purpose, and also gives itself existence. So obviously we're not talking about a normal language. What we're actually talking about is a self-modeling meta language. And Langen points out that reality, even as normally conceived, conforms to the general definition of a language. It has representations of objects like individuals and relations and attributes, functions, operations, and so forth. So space, time, and object actually are all different parts of the basic signs of language, the general categories, verbs, nouns, whatever, that actually corresponds to these functions, operations, relations, attributes. Though the basic categories of terms in language are also similar to space and time. So there's a set of expressions or perceptual states, things that can be meaningfully combined with one another, a syntax consisting of the rules of structure, and a grammar identifiable with the laws of state transition. So how things evolve within reality is not random, it is structured. And where we're considering the objects, processes, and relations within reality as being linguistic, then that structure is also grammatical. So because cognition, and also because perception and cognition are languages, just by virtue of how they're interpreted within the human mind, and reality is cognitive and perceptual in nature, then reality is a language as well. So reality is a language because it is cognitive and perceptual, because it is actually recognizable as human cognitive perceptual input, meaning that we can perceive everything within reality within our minds, at least that which is in the display domain, that which is directly capable of being thought or perceived by us. And also reality itself conforms to the algebraic definition of a language, as we just discussed. So reality is a language. The way by which we understand reality is a language, and therefore any theory of reality that is not as a self-modeling language won't actually understand what a theory is, because a theory is a self-modeling language. We are a language, the thing that we're looking at as a language, and there is a self model that connects those two things. And that means that we are actually somehow inextricably linked with the thing that we are theorizing about. Somehow our human cognitive perceptual syntax is extending over that which we are describing, perceiving, conceiving of. And reality is basically responding to that input, and we are able to theorize, we are able to understand what that is because we share common structure. If there were not if cognition and perception were not linguistic, or reality were not linguistic, there would be no way for us to meaningfully identify reality. So reality is created through, Langen says, quote, a grammatical derivation in which a series of substitutions, a start symbol, evolves through a derivational series of non-terminal expressions to a communicable terminal expression. So basically you start with a start symbol, which literally is the definition of a sentence without any words. So it's the idea of a sentence that precedes any single way in which it's been organized. And that initial idea, that initial form of the sentence is then replaced by content. It's not immediately replaced by the words, but then it's replaced. So let's say I want to express that I really want that mug. I really want to grab it, but I don't have the words yet. First, I just have that general idea prior to any linguistic representation. It's just an abstract idea. It hasn't even been put into words in my head. That's a common expression. And then there are non-terminal ways that is then substituted out for. So then, I might start to look at things which are of utility to me. I might start to actually try to use my cognition in order to identify that which I lack and that which I am actually trying to express that I want. And then ultimately, I will then apply the linguistic structure to then transform those series of needs, those designs and potentials that are occurring in my head for what I want to do. And then I'll turn those into words. I'll turn those into, like, I'll say to the person over there, hey, can you pass me that mug? And all of that happens within our minds, that we are able to think about all those things in the same way. That's the same way in which reality is created. There's a general drive based on this self-attributed existence that reality wants to exist. It then creates this non-terminal domain, this world of programming and design that is capable of then being substituted in. Those abstract expressions can then be substituted in. You can replace those with concrete instantiations that match the general idea of what reality is trying to achieve through those designs and potential. And then that potentialization becomes actualization. So then reality becomes a communicable terminal expression, and is actually something which it's not only referring to something, but there is something to which it is referring. So reality consists of basically two domains: a non-terminal domain, which is that which is referring to things, that is which creating designs and potentials, and then a terminal domain, which is those designs and potentials then actualized, and that which to which that intrinsic language is referring, and that which is doing the reference. So reality is a self-referential system that is attributing existence to itself and constantly designing future realities for itself through the interaction between the non-terminal and terminal domains. That's called telic recursion, which is constantly adjusting on the fly to the configurations of reality. It's trying to find that which will be of most utility to the global reality system through the alternation of syntax and state, respectively corresponding to the non-terminal and terminal domains. So reality is essentially a self-programming or self-configuring language that is ascribing existence to itself and is programming itself to lead to the most optimal outcome. So that's why reality is called, again, it's a self-configuring, self-processing language that can be described as a meta-language, therefore, through and through. It's a self-configuring, self-processing meta-language that evolves metacausally, meaning that it has a more advanced causation. It has a more advanced temporal structure because it's not only moving from the past to the future, but there are future non-terminal designs that are that haven't been instantiated yet, but that future idea for what could possibly be real is then distributing to the present moment in order to create a timeline that will lead to its future emergence. So the self-configuring, self-processing meta-language evolves metacausally, metatemporally, and metaphysically. SCSPL takes space-time as its universe, so takes that as its domain of discourse. And so basically the universe is the terminal expression of that global language. That's what we said at the beginning, is that the language is that the universe is that to which the language refers. And then it takes that space-time, it takes the terminal domain and fuses it with a metaphysical dual, a non-terminal domain, through which it exists and evolves, and spans the duality into a self-contained synthetic relationship. So the SCSPL-CM coupling can be expressed by saying that the metacausation and other metaphysical criteria require that the standard physical conception of space-time, this is what Langen says, be superseded by a more advanced metaphysical conceptualization that is logico-geometrically dual to the linguistic structure of the triadic identity. The conspansive manifold is self-generative and requires 3 levels of topology and 3 corresponding levels of quantization. The conspansive manifold is dynamically self-contained. In coupling with the linguistic identity, it evolves by generative self-modeling, embedding conventional space-time as a linear ectomorphic semi-model corresponding to the semi-language LO of the TOE identity. So basically, LO, the objective universe, is that to which the language refers. LS, the subjective universe, is that which it is referring to. Reality is a self-referential, self-logical, and self-configuring system that is evolving linguistically through the SCSPL, and it is ascribing to existence to itself, and that language is the abstract definition of reality. So basically the CTMU just defines reality as a language that talks to itself, about itself, for its own purposes, and the structure and dynamics of SCSPL can be viewed through the lens of mathematical metaphysics. So that is really what is the domain of discourse of mathematical metaphysics. Obviously, this is reality theory, because reality is a language, it is also language theory. And so that's why Langen describes the CTMU as when language theory and reality theory mix and they beget a synthesis. So we have to talk about not only language theory, which we'll talk about in our courses on the metaformal system, but we're also talking about reality theory. And then those two things are intrinsically linked because reality is a language. So that's really what mathematical metaphysics is all about. It's about the combination of reality and language and the formal study of each of those as an academic discipline. So as a mathematical metaphysician, you are a theorist not only of language, but of reality, not only of reality, but of language, and not only of each of those two elements, but of the connection between them. So you really have to understand that reality is a language and be able to explicate that structure in order to understand what mathematical metaphysics is trying to say. So thank you. God bless. Take care.